Abandoned by family, poor girl saves a man. Little does she know he's a CEO who cherishes her deeply. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. I am very happy that you are enjoying my stories and your responses tell me all. The satisfying comment for me is, I am satisfied. If you are satisfied, I am also satisfied. Let's start with a beautiful prayer from Jesus for our family's happiness. Dear Lord Jesus, bless our family gathered here today. Fill our hearts with joy and love as we share stories together. Guide us to bring happiness to each other's lives. Thank you for bringing us together in harmony. Amen. Another game today. What is your favorite food? And which food from your country would you recommend other family members to taste? At the end of the story, I will share my and Binta's favorite foods too. Are you satisfied with my yesterday's 2 stories? Let's proceed with love. Now please share your favorite foods with our family. Thunder crackled across Manhattan's rain-slicked streets, each flash of lightning illuminating the towering skyscrapers that pierced the storm-darkened sky. Siona Remley stood beneath the awning of Le Petit Café, her shoulders trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of the decision she'd just made. Her designer coat, a Burberry trench in deep midnight blue, clung to her curves, the last remnant of the life she'd walked away from mere hours ago. The rain fell in sheets, turning the city into a shimmering mirror of despair. 6 hours earlier, she'd stood in her stepmother's opulent penthouse, facing an ultimatum that would shatter her world. Victoria Thorne Remley, a woman whose beauty masked a heart of steel, had delivered the final blow to Siona's already fragile existence. "Sign over your inheritance, or I'll destroy everything your mother built," Victoria had sneered, manicured fingers tapping against the mahogany desk. Her reputation, her legacy, everything she worked for, gone with one press conference. The memory of those words burned in Siona's mind as she watched the rain fall. Her mother, Dr. Amara Remley, had been a beacon of hope in the medical world, developing breakthrough treatments for children with rare diseases. But 3 years ago, a tragic plane crash had taken her life, leaving Siona alone with a stepmother whose jealousy had finally shown its true colors. Lightning split the sky again, and Siona pulled her coat tighter. The envelope in her pocket felt heavy, documents that would have signed away her birthright, her future, her mother's legacy. She'd chosen freedom instead, walking away from the luxury and security she'd known all her life. A gust of wind whipped her dark curls across her face, and she closed her eyes, remembering her mother's words. "Sometimes, mi amor, the bravest thing we can do is start over." The wisdom of those words echoed in her heart as she stood at the crossroads of her life, 26 years old, and suddenly alone in a city that showed no mercy to lost souls. Through the downpour, the distinctive growl of a high-performance engine cut through the night. Siona's eyes snapped open as a black Aston Martin DBS roared down the rain-slicked street, moving far too fast for the treacherous conditions. Time seemed to slow as she watched the inevitable unfold. The car hit a pool of standing water, hydroplaning toward the intersection. The driver tried to correct, but physics had already taken control. The Aston Martin spun once, twice, its tires finding no purchase on the flooded asphalt. Without thinking, Siona sprinted into the rain, her heels splashing through puddles as the car slammed into a lamppost with a sickening crunch of metal and glass. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood as she reached the driver's side door. Through the spider-webbed glass, she could see him, unconscious, slumped over the steering wheel. The door handle resisted at first, then gave way with a groan of protesting metal. The interior light flickered on, revealing a man in his early 30s, wearing what had once been an impeccable Tom Ford suit. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, staining his crisp white collar crimson. Even unconscious, his features held a commanding presence. Strong jaw, aristocratic nose, and lips that seemed made for both issuing orders and whispering secrets. Siona's medical training kicked in, a gift from years of watching her mother work. She checked his pulse, strong but rapid. Breathing, regular. Spine, no obvious trauma. The head wound looked superficial, but with head injuries, appearances could be deceiving. She pulled out her phone, dialing emergency services with trembling fingers. "I need an ambulance," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Single vehicle accident, male victim, early 30s, unconscious but stable. While she waited, she continued her assessment, speaking softly to the unconscious man. "Stay with me," she murmured, her fingers gentle as she checked his pupils. "You're not alone. I've got you." A soft groan escaped his lips, and his eyelids fluttered. For a brief moment, his eyes opened, a striking shade of grey that reminded her of storm clouds just before dawn. His gaze met hers, unfocused but intense. "An angel," he whispered, his voice rough with pain and something else, a note of wonder that made her heart skip. "Save your strength," she replied, fighting the unexpected flutter in her stomach. "Help is coming." He tried to move, but she placed a gentle hand on his chest. Through the wet fabric of his shirt, she could feel his heart beating, strong, steady, alive. "Stay still," she instructed. "You could have internal injuries." His hand found hers, his grip surprisingly strong despite his condition. "Don't leave," he mumbled, before losing consciousness again. The wail of sirens grew closer as Siona held his hand, rain mixing with tears. She hadn't realized she was crying. In the space of a single night, she'd lost everything she'd ever known. And now fate had thrust her into the role of guardian angel for a stranger who stirred something deep within her soul. The ambulance arrived in a flash of red and white, paramedics swarming the scene with professional efficiency. "What's your relationship to the patient?" one asked as they worked to stabilize him. The question caught her off guard. In that moment, watching them strap him to a backboard, she made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "I'm his wife," she said, the lie tasting both bitter and sweet on her tongue. They loaded him into the ambulance, and Siona climbed in beside him. As they raced through the rain-soaked streets toward the hospital, she studied his face, wondering what kind of man she'd just tied herself to with a single lie. His features spoke of power and privilege, but there was something else, a vulnerability in the way his hand had sought hers, a gentleness in his unconscious state that called to the broken places in her heart. In the harsh fluorescent light of the ambulance, she noticed more details, the perfect tailoring of his suit, the platinum Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, the signet ring that spoke of old money and older traditions. Whoever he was, he belonged to a world she'd just walked away from, a world of wealth and power that had shown her nothing but cruelty. Yet as she watched his chest rise and fall, as she felt the warmth of his hand in hers, she knew she couldn't walk away. Not now, not from him. Whatever morning brought, whatever consequences came with her impulsive lie, she would face them. Because for the first time since her mother's death, she felt something awakening inside her, a purpose, a connection, a chance to make a difference in someone's life. The ambulance wove through the city streets, its siren a lonely cry in the storm-swept night. Siona Remley, who had lost everything just hours before, held tight to a stranger's hand and whispered a prayer to whoever might be listening. Let him live. Let this night mean something more than loss. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the past and clearing the way for whatever destiny had in store. In the back of that ambulance, on a night when everything had changed, two lost souls began a journey neither could have imagined, a journey that would lead them through darkness and light, through lies and truth, to a love that would redefine everything they thought they knew about fate, family, and the power of starting over. As they pulled up to the emergency entrance of Mount Sinai Hospital, Siona squeezed his hand one last time before the paramedics whisked him away. Standing in the fluorescent-lit waiting room, her wet clothes creating a puddle on the polished floor, she realized she didn't even know his name. Yet somehow she knew her life would never be the same. She collapsed into an uncomfortable plastic chair, her mother's pendant heavy against her chest. The last piece of her old life, now witness to the beginning of something new. Whatever morning brought, she would face it, because sometimes, as her mother had taught her, the end of one story is just the beginning of another. Chapter 2. White Lies and White Walls. The fluorescent lights of Mount Sinai Hospital's emergency ward cast harsh shadows across Siona's face as she stood at the admit desk, her heart pounding against her ribs. The night nurse, Patricia, according to her badge, regarded her with the practiced skepticism of someone who'd heard every possible story. Relationship to the patient? Patricia's pen hovered over the admission form, her dark eyes narrowing with suspicion. Siona's fingers clutched the edge of the counter, leaving damp prints from her rain-soaked clothes. The lie she'd told in the ambulance now faced its first real test. "I'm his wife," she repeated, praying her voice wouldn't betray her. "Name?" A moment of panic seized her chest. She didn't even know his name. Just then, a wallet was placed on the counter, rescued from the accident scene by a paramedic. The leather was expensive, handcrafted, and embossed with initials. "V.R. Mrs. River," Siona said, catching the name as the wallet fell open. "Vigil River is my husband." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly at the name, though Siona was too focused on maintaining her composure to notice the reaction. The nurse's fingers flew across the keyboard, entering information with practiced efficiency. "Insurance? We were at dinner. His wallet, ... Siona gestured helplessly at the sodden leather. "We'll sort it out later," Patricia said, her expression softening slightly. "The doctors need to examine him. You can wait here." The waiting room became Siona's world for the next 4 hours. She paced the worn linoleum floor, her Louboutins long since discarded under a chair, her bare feet silent against the cold surface. Every time the double doors swung open, her heart leaped, expecting news. Finally, a doctor emerged. Dr. James Chen, neurology. His surgical cap was still on, and fatigue lined his eyes. "Mrs. River." Siona rose on unsteady feet, her whole body trembling. "Your husband is stable," Dr. Chen began, and Siona felt her knees weaken with relief. "The head trauma is significant, but not as severe as we initially feared. However, he's still unconscious, and the next 24 hours will be critical." "Can I see him?" Dr. Chen nodded, leading her through the labyrinth of hospital corridors. "He's in the ICU. Talk to him. Familiar voices can help." Room 742 was eerily quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors. Vigil lay still against white sheets, his powerful frame somehow diminished by the hospital gown and bandages. A bruise darkened his left temple, disappearing beneath the pristine white gauze that wrapped around his head. Siona approached the bed slowly, taking in every detail. In the sterile hospital light, his features were even more striking than they'd been in the rain. Strong cheekbones, a jaw that could have been carved from marble, and lips that, even in unconsciousness, held a hint of determination. She sank into the chair beside his bed, reaching for his hand. His skin was warm against hers, his fingers long and elegant, despite the medical tape and IV lines. "I'm here," she whispered, not sure if she was reassuring him or herself. The night stretched endlessly. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medications. Siona didn't move from her vigil, her thumb tracing absent patterns on the back of Vigil's hand as she talked softly about everything and nothing. Dawn found her curled in the uncomfortable chair, her designer dress wrinkled beyond salvation, her curls a wild halo around her face. A gentle touch on her shoulder startled her awake. Mrs. River. A new nurse stood there, holding a paper cup of coffee and a hospital voucher. "The cafeteria's open. You should eat something." Siona shook her head. "I can't leave him." "He's stable." The nurse, Maya, her badge red, said kindly. "And you need to take care of yourself too." Reluctantly, Siona accepted the coffee and voucher. Standing, she pressed a gentle kiss to Vigil's forehead, careful to avoid the bandages. "I'll be right back," she promised. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty at this early hour. Siona picked at a bland breakfast, her mind upstairs with the mysterious man who'd crashed into her life as dramatically as he'd crashed his car. What was she doing? The question haunted her as she stirred her cooling coffee. She'd lost everything last night, walked away from a life of privilege and security, and now here she was, pretending to be the wife of a stranger, diving deeper into what could only be described as madness. Yet something kept her there, something beyond duty or curiosity. Perhaps it was the way his hand had sought hers in the ambulance, or the vulnerability in his unconscious face that called to something deep within her soul. Returning to his room, she found Maya changing his bandages. "The swelling's going down," the nurse reported. "That's a good sign." Days began to blur together. Siona learned the rhythms of the ICU, shift changes, doctors' rounds, the quiet hours of night when the world seemed to shrink to just her and Vitgil's steady breathing. She washed in the tiny bathroom, using hospital soap and paper towels. Her designer dress was beyond hope, but Maya brought her scrubs to change into. On the third day, she made a decision that would change everything. The hospital bills were mounting, and she could see the administration getting anxious about payment. In her purse, she still carried her mother's pendant, 18-carat gold with a rare pink diamond, a family heirloom that had been her last connection to her past. The pawn shop was 2 blocks from the hospital. The owner, an elderly man with kind eyes, examined the pendant carefully. "This is exceptional work," he said. "French, late 19th century?" Siona nodded, fighting back tears. "It was my mother's." He named a price that was far below the pendant's true worth, but more than enough to cover the immediate hospital expenses. Siona signed the papers with trembling fingers, feeling as though she was selling a piece of her soul. Back in the hospital room, she placed the receipt carefully in her purse, then resumed her vigil. "I hope you're worth it," she whispered to Vigil's sleeping form. That night, something changed. Maybe it was exhaustion, or the emotional toll of giving up her last treasure, but Siona found herself talking more openly to the unconscious man beside her. "I don't even know you," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper in the darkness. "But I've given up everything I had left to keep you safe. My mother would say I'm crazy. Maybe I am, but there's something about you." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, feeling the slight roughness of stubble beneath her touch. "Who are you, Vigil River? What kind of man inspires a stranger to become his makeshift guardian angel?" As if in response to her touch, his breathing changed slightly. His eyelids fluttered, though didn't open. Siona held her breath, but he remained unconscious. 7 days passed in this strange limbo. Siona learned every line of Vitgil's face, every subtle change in his breathing. She memorized the pattern of his heartbeat on the monitors, could tell by sound alone when something was off. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. "The brain swelling has resolved," Dr. Chen reported. "His body is healing. Now we just wait for him to wake up." On the morning of the 7th day, Siona was dozing in her chair when a change in the rhythm of beeping jolted her awake. She looked up to find storm-gray eyes staring at her with intense focus. "An angel," Vigil whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "You're real." Siona's heart stuttered in her chest. "You're awake," she managed, fighting the urge to throw herself into his arms. "You stayed," he said wonderingly, his hand reaching for hers with surprising strength. "Of course I stayed." His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "Why?" Before she could answer, the room filled with medical staff. Dr. Chen began his examination while nurses checked vitals and adjusted equipment. Siona tried to step back, but Vitgil's grip on her hand tightened. "Don't leave," he said, his eyes never leaving her face. "I'm right here," she promised, even as her mind raced with the implications of his awakening. Soon he would have questions about her, about their supposed marriage, about everything. The lie that had sustained her through the past week would crumble in the harsh light of consciousness. Yet as she stood there, holding his hand while the doctors worked, she couldn't bring herself to regret any of it. Whatever came next, whatever price she had to pay for her deception, she knew she'd do it all again. Because in those grey eyes, now alert and fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch, she saw something that both thrilled and terrified her. A recognition, a connection, a promise of something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Hope. The morning light streamed through the hospital windows, painting the room in shades of gold and promise. Outside, New York City woke to another day, unaware that in a quiet hospital room, 2 lives were about to change forever. Siona Remley, who had lost everything to save her mother's legacy, stood on the precipice of a new beginning. And Vitgil River, the mysterious man who had crashed into her life, was about to turn her world upside down in ways she could never have imagined. Chapter 3. Awakening consciousness returned to Vitgil River like waves lapping at a shore, gentle at first, then with increasing intensity. The sterile hospital scent filled his nostrils, but beneath it was something else, a delicate perfume that spoke of rain-washed gardens and midnight promises. His eyelids felt heavy, but he forced them open, drawn by an inexplicable need to confirm what his other senses were telling him. She was there, the angel from the rain. Dark curls tumbled over her shoulders as she dozed in the uncomfortable hospital chair, her face peaceful in sleep despite the obvious exhaustion etched in the shadows beneath her eyes. Her hand rested near his on the white hospital sheets, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Vitgil tried to speak, but his throat was desert dry. The small movement was enough to wake her, though. Those eyes, deep brown with flecks of gold, flew open, meeting his with an intensity that made his heart rate spike on the monitor. "You're awake," she breathed, leaning forward. Her voice was even more beautiful than he remembered from his brief moments of consciousness during the past week, moments he'd been half convinced were fever dreams. "Angel," he managed, his voice rough from disuse. A slight blush colored her cheeks at the word, and something stirred in his chest at the sight. She reached for a cup of water with a straw, her movements graceful despite her obvious fatigue. "Small sips," she instructed, holding it to his lips. The cool water was heaven, but Vitgil found himself more focused on the gentle way she cradled his head, the brush of her fingers against his neck, sending electricity through his weakened body. "You stayed," he said when she pulled the cup away. It wasn't a question. He had fragments of memories, glimpses of her constant presence through the darkness that had enveloped him. "Of course I stayed." Her voice held a note of vulnerability that made him want to pull her into his arms. Hospital beds and injuries be damned. Why? The question escaped before he could stop it. In his world of corporate takeovers and family power plays, such selfless dedication was as rare as snow in summer. She hesitated, and something flickered across her face. Uncertainty. Fear. Before she could answer, the door opened, and a flood of medical staff entered the room. Vitgil maintained his grip on her hand as they examined him, asked questions, tested his responses. His eyes never left her face, watching the play of emotions across her delicate features. When they were finally alone again, the silence between them felt charged with unspoken words. Vitgil studied her more carefully now, noting the designer dress that had clearly seen better days, the bare feet tucked beneath her chair, the way she held herself with unconscious grace despite her disheveled appearance. "You look exhausted," he said softly. "When was the last time you slept properly?" A small smile touched her lips. "I've been a bit preoccupied." "With me?" He shifted slightly in the bed, ignoring the protest of his muscles. "I don't even know your name." Something flashed in her eyes. Panic, before she squared her shoulders slightly. "Siona," she said. "Siona Remley." "Siona," he repeated, letting the name roll over his tongue like fine wine. Beautiful name for a beautiful angel. The blush returned to her cheeks, and Vitgil felt an overwhelming urge to trace it with his fingers. Instead, he asked, "How long have I been here?" 7 days, she replied, her free hand unconsciously moving to touch a spot at her throat, as though reaching for something that was no longer there. 7 days. A week of his life, lost to darkness. But not completely lost, not with her keeping vigil beside him. The thought stirred something protective in his chest. "You've been here the whole time." She nodded, dropping her gaze to their joined hands. "I couldn't leave you alone." The simple admission hit him like a physical force. In his world of calculated moves and strategic alliances, such pure devotion was foreign. Yet here she sat, this beautiful stranger who had apparently put her entire life on hold for him. "Why?" he asked again, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Siona's breath caught at his touch. I couldn't walk away. Not after... After what? After I saw you in the rain. You were so still, so vulnerable. I've lost too much already. I couldn't bear to lose someone else, even a stranger." The pain in her voice made his chest ache. Vitgil tugged gently on her hand, pulling her closer to the bed. "Come here," he whispered. She rose from the chair, moving to perch on the edge of his bed. This close, he could see the gold flecks in her eyes more clearly, could count the faint freckles across her nose that made her look both innocent and utterly beguiling. "You saved my life," he said softly, reaching up to brush a stray curl from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and he felt her lean almost imperceptibly into his touch. "Anyone would have done the same," she murmured, but they both knew it wasn't true. How many people would have run into the rain? How many would have stayed for 7 days, sleeping in a chair, keeping watch over a stranger? "No," Vitgil said firmly, "not anyone, just you, my angel." Their eyes locked, and the air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Vitgil's hand slid to the nape of her neck, gentle but insistent. Siona's lips parted slightly, her pulse visible in the delicate hollow of her throat. The moment stretched like honey, sweet and golden. Then a nurse knocked and entered with medication, breaking the spell. Siona pulled back slightly, but Vitgil noticed she didn't move far, staying perched on the edge of his bed, as though drawn by some invisible force. As the day progressed, more medical staff came and went, running tests and checking his responses. Through it all, Siona remained a constant presence, anticipating his needs before he could voice them, helping him sit up, adjusting his pillows with gentle hands that seemed to linger against him longer than strictly necessary. By evening, exhaustion was evident in every line of her body, though she tried to hide it. Vitgil watched as she stifled another yawn, her eyelids drooping despite her obvious determination to stay awake. "Sleep," he commanded softly. "I'm not going anywhere." She shook her head stubbornly. "I'm fine." "Siona." He put every ounce of authority he possessed into her name. "You've watched over me for 7 days. Let me watch over you for a few hours." A battle played out across her face, exhaustion warring with what looked like fear. Please." He patted the space beside him on the wide hospital bed. "There's room." Her eyes widened. "I couldn't." "You can. You will." His voice softened. "Let me take care of you for a change." Perhaps it was exhaustion that finally won out, or perhaps something in his voice reached past her defenses. Whatever the reason, Siona carefully climbed onto the bed beside him, maintaining a small space between their bodies. Vitgil wasn't having it. With his good arm, he pulled her closer until her head rested on his chest. Her body curled against his side. He felt her initial tension, then the gradual relaxation as exhaustion overtook her resistance. "Sleep, angel," he murmured into her hair, breathing in that intoxicating scent of rain and flowers. "I've got you." Her breathing deepened and evened out almost immediately, her body melting against his as though she'd finally found her way home. Vigil stayed awake, one hand stroking her hair, marveling at how right this felt. This beautiful stranger in his arms, this unexpected connection that defied all logic. The night deepened around them, the hospital's usual sounds fading into background noise. Vigil's body ached from his injuries, but he wouldn't have moved for all the wealth in Manhattan. Not when he could feel Siona's heartbeat against his chest, her warm breath against his skin, her delicate hand curled trustingly against his heart. Tomorrow would bring questions about his accident, about her presence here, about the strange and powerful connection growing between them. But for now, in the quiet darkness of the hospital room, Vitgil River held his saving angel and knew with bone-deep certainty that his life would never be the same. The moonlight filtered through the hospital window, painting silver highlights in Siona's dark curls. Vitgil pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, feeling her snuggle closer in her sleep. Whatever mystery surrounded this woman, whatever circumstances had brought her into his life, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He would move heaven and earth to keep her by his side. As sleep finally began to claim him, Vitgil's last conscious thought was of how perfectly she fit in his arms, as though she'd been created specifically to fill this space against his heart. His angel, his mystery, his Siona, and if he had any say in the matter, his future. Chapter 4. The River Estate. The private hospital suite had become their world for 2 weeks after Vitgil regained consciousness. Each day brought small victories. First steps down the hallway, strength returning to his hands, color to his face. Siona watched his progress with a nurse's attention and something deeper she dared not name. On the morning of his release, sunlight streamed through the hospital windows as Siona helped pack his belongings. Her fingers lingered over the silk pajamas she'd hand-washed each night, the books they'd read together during long evening hours. "Come with me," Vitgil said, his voice still carrying traces of sleep. He caught her hand as she folded the last shirt, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm that made her breath catch. "You've already proven yourself the best caregiver I could ask for." Siona felt the weight of what he was asking. The past weeks had created a bubble around them, a space where social distinctions blurred and hearts spoke freely. Outside these walls waited a world of wealth and power she'd walked away from. "Your family," she began, but he interrupted gently. "Need to know the woman who saved my life." His grey eyes held hers with quiet intensity. "I'm not fully recovered, Siona. I need you." Those 3 words, "I need you," seemed to echo in the quiet room. Siona looked down at their joined hands, remembering how his fingers had sought hers, even in unconsciousness. "For how long?" she asked softly. "As long as you'll stay." The drive to Greenwich took them through tree-lined streets where autumn painted the world in shades of gold and crimson. Siona watched the passing landscape from the Bentley's leather-back seat, acutely aware of Vitgil beside her. He'd insisted on having her ride with him, rather than following in a separate car, brushing aside the chauffeur's raised eyebrows. The river estate emerged like a modernist dream behind imposing wrought-iron gates. Glass and steel rose in elegant lines, while manicured gardens stretched in every direction. Water features caught the morning light, their spray creating rainbows that reminded Siona of the night everything changed. A small army of staff waited on the front steps, led by a woman who could only be Margot River. Her steel-grey hair was swept into an elegant chignon that emphasized her razor-sharp cheekbones. The Chanel suit she wore probably cost more than most people made in a month. "Welcome home, darling." Margot's voice carried the cultured tones of old money. Her eyes assessed Siona with the precision of a jeweler examining a suspicious stone. "And this is your nurse?" Vitgil's hand found the small of Siona's back, a gesture both protective and possessive. "This is Siona," he said, his voice carrying quiet authority. "She saved my life. She'll be staying with us during my recovery." Margot's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. How generous of her. The pause before generous carried volumes of implications. The next hours passed in a blur of introductions and barely concealed scrutiny. Each family member who came to welcome Vitgil home carried the distinctive river features, those storm-grey eyes, that unconscious air of authority. And each one looked at Siona with varying degrees of suspicion. Maria, the head housekeeper, showed them to their rooms. Vitgil to the master suite in the west wing, Siona to a smaller but elegant room nearby. "For convenience during night checks," Vitgil explained to his aunt's disapproving face. The first few days established a tense routine. Siona focused on Vitgil's care, supervising his physical therapy exercises, monitoring his medication, watching for any signs of post-concussion symptoms. The River family watched her with equal intensity, noting every touch, every shared smile, every private moment. "A gold digger, obviously," she overheard one cousin say in the conservatory, taking advantage of his gratitude. "Did you see the way she looks at him?" another whispered. "Like she's memorizing his bank balance." But Vitgil's trust never wavered. In the private moments between medical checks and family obligations, something deeper grew between them. Their hands would touch as she helped him with exercises, lingering longer than necessary. Their eyes would meet across rooms, carrying messages no one else could read. One evening, finding him restless in the library, Siona sat beside him on the leather couch. The fire painted shadows across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows. "You should be resting," she chided gently. "I rest better when you're near," he admitted, his fingers finding hers in the firelight. The touch sent electricity through them both. "Everything's clearer when you're here." She should have pulled away, should have maintained professional distance. But something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, made her heart ache with longing. Their first kiss happened naturally, inevitably, like the tide meeting the shore. His hand cupped her cheek with infinite tenderness, thumb tracing her lower lip. Time seemed to stop as he leaned in, his breath mingling with hers, but before their lips could meet, a deliberately cleared throat from the doorway shattered the moment. Margot stood there, elegant and arctic in cream silk. "Dinner is served," she announced, her tone carrying winter's chill. "Though perhaps our guest would prefer to dine in her room tonight?" The challenge in her voice was clear, but Siona had faced worse than Margot River's disapproval. Rising with quiet dignity, she met the older woman's gaze. "Thank you, but I'll join the family," she said calmly. "Vitgil still needs monitoring during meals." It was a medical truth wielded like a sword, and even Margot couldn't argue. But as Siona helped Vitgil to the dining room, she felt the weight of the family's judgment. She was an outsider, a threat to their carefully ordered world of wealth and tradition. That night, alone in her room, Siona stood at the window watching moonlight silver the gardens below. She touched her lips, still tingling from their almost kiss, and wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Vitgil's face. All she could feel was the way her heart raced when he was near. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that their greatest test was yet to come. Forces were already in motion, schemes being laid, traps being set. Soon they would face a choice between trust and doubt, between love and family loyalty. A choice that would either destroy everything growing between them, or prove that some connections transcend all barriers of wealth and social position. As Siona finally slipped into bed, the pendant's absence at her throat reminded her of sacrifices already made. She'd given up her last link to her mother to save Vitgil's life. The question now was, how much more would love demand of them both? Outside her window, a crescent moon sailed through clouds like a ship navigating troubled waters. Inside the river mansion, shadows lengthened and schemes deepened, while two hearts beat in growing synchronization, unaware of the storms gathering on their horizon. Chapter 5. Shadows and Schemes. Night fell over the river estate like a velvet curtain, shadows stretching across manicured lawns and marble halls. Siona stood at the window of her suite, watching moonlight silver the rose gardens below. The silk robe Vitgil had sent up whispered against her skin, still damp from her bath. Her reflection in the window looked like a ghost, pale, uncertain, caught between two worlds. The dinner hour approached with the weight of impending battle. Margot River's perfectly modulated voice carried through the halls as she directed staff, each command a reminder of who truly ruled this domain. Siona's fingers touched her lips, still tingling from Vitgil's kiss, drawing strength from the memory. A soft knock at her door made her heart leap. But instead of Vitgil's commanding presence, she found Maria, one of the maids, bearing a garment bag. "Mr. River asked that this be brought up for you, miss," Maria said, her eyes carefully downcast. She hung the bag in the massive walk-in closet, then hesitated. "Will you be needing help dressing?" Siona shook her head, touched by Vitgil's thoughtfulness, but uncomfortable with the formality. "No, thank you. I can manage." Once alone, she unzipped the bag with trembling fingers. The dress inside took her breath away. Midnight blue silk that shimmered like starlight, cut to emphasize curves while maintaining elegance. The tag read Oscar de la Renta, and she didn't dare think about the price. As she slipped it on, the silk caressed her skin like a lover's touch. The dress fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Standing before the full-length mirror, Siona barely recognized herself. The woman reflected back, looked like she belonged in this world of old money and older power. Her hair fell in natural waves past her shoulders, still damp from the bath. The dress's neckline emphasized the elegant line of her throat, making the absence of her mother's pendant more noticeable. Tears pricked at her eyes as she remembered the weight of it against her skin, the last piece of her mother she'd had to sacrifice. Voices in the hallway drew her attention, hushed, urgent whispers that made her step closer to the door. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? A woman's voice, one of Vitgil's cousins, Siona thought, shows up like an angel of mercy, then refuses to leave his side. Margot's looking into her background. Another voice, male this time. Something doesn't add up. The clothes she arrived in were designer, but she claims to have no family, no connections. Gold digger, obviously. But Vitgil's always had a blind spot for a pretty face. Their footsteps faded, but their words lingered like poison in the air. Siona's hands trembled as she applied the minimal makeup she'd found in the bathroom, another thoughtful touch from Vitgil, all high-end brands in perfectly chosen shades. A different knock at the door, stronger, more commanding. Her heart recognized it before her mind did. Vitgil stood in the doorway, devastating in a black suit that emphasized his powerful frame. His eyes darkened as they took her in, traveling from her bare feet to her flushed face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Beautiful," he murmured, stepping into the room and closing the door. The click of the latch seemed to seal them in their own private world. "The dress is too much," Siona protested softly. "I can't accept—" "You can. You will." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands settling on her waist. "Let me do this for you. Let me give you everything you deserve." The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache. If only he knew the truth, about her lies, about who she really was. But his touch scattered her thoughts like leaves in the wind. "Vitgil," she breathed as his fingers traced the bare skin of her shoulders. "Your family can go to hell." His voice was velvet over steel. "I know what they're saying. I know they're plotting and scheming. Let them." His hand cupped her cheek, tilting her face up to his. "You're worth any battle." Their lips met with the intensity of stars colliding. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, hungrier, filled with promises and possibilities. Siona's hands fisted in his jacket as his tongue swept into her mouth, claiming her with a passion that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Vitgil rested his forehead against hers. "I should let you finish getting ready," he murmured, though his hand stayed possessively on her waist. "I'll only be a moment." Siona's voice was husky, affected by their kiss and the heat in his eyes. He pressed one more brief, searing kiss to her lips before stepping back. "I'll wait in the hall. No one gets to escort you to dinner but me." Alone again, Siona slipped on the Jimmy Choo heels that had been included with the dress. They fit perfectly, like everything else he'd chosen. How did he know her so well after so little time? The answer whispered in her heart, the same way she'd known him in the rain, known he was worth saving, worth sacrificing everything for. Some connections transcended time and logic. She opened the door to find him waiting, exactly as promised. His eyes darkened again as he took in the complete picture, the dress, the heels, the way her hair framed her face in wild waves. "My angel," he murmured, offering his arm, "ready to face the wolves." Siona slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, drawing strength from his solid presence. "As ready as I'll ever be." They descended the grand staircase together, their steps perfectly matched. In the great hall below, the assembled River family turned as one to watch their entrance. Siona felt their stares like physical things, some curious, some calculating, all assessing. Margot stood at the center of the group, resplendent in burgundy Valentino. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she took in Siona's transformation. "The dress suits you, dear," she said, her tone suggesting surprise, though perhaps a bit ambitious for a family dinner. "I chose it," Vitgil said before Siona could respond. "She makes everything look extraordinary, don't you think?" The compliment sent whispers through the assembled family members. Siona felt her cheeks warm, but kept her chin high. She'd learned poise at her mother's knee, watching Dr. Amara Remley navigate hospital boards and charity galas with equal grace. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, where priceless art graced silk-covered walls and crystal chandeliers cast rainbow shadows over the assembled family. Siona found herself seated between Vitgil and his cousin Blake, a hedge fund manager whose smile never quite reached his eyes. "So, Siona," Blake began as the first course was served, "what exactly do you do? When you're not saving wayward CEOs, that is." The question was a trap, carefully baited. Siona felt Vitgil tense beside her, but she kept her voice steady. "I was in medical school, following in my mother's footsteps. Life had other plans." "Ah, yes, Your mother, Margot's voice carried from the head of the table. You must tell us about your family, dear. Good breeding shows, after all. The implied insult hung in the air like smoke. Seona's hand tightened on her fork, but before she could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Maria burst into the dining room, her face pale. Madam, she addressed Margot, there's been a theft. The safe in the blue room, it's been opened. The room erupted in controlled chaos. Margot rose, her face tight with anger. What was taken? The river sapphires, madam, and some other pieces. All eyes turned to Seona. The weight of their suspicion was suffocating. Vitgil's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to command. Of course, Margot smiled, but her eyes were arctic. Though perhaps we should ask our guest if she noticed anything unusual during her time upstairs. The accusation was clear. Seona felt her world tilting on its axis, everything she'd built with Vitgil threatening to crumble. I believe I know what happened to your jewels, Aunt Margot. A new voice entered the fray. Isabella River, Vitgil's younger cousin. She stood in the doorway, holding something that caught the light. I found this in an interesting place. Seona's heart stopped. In Isabella's hand dangled her mother's pendant, the one she'd pawned to pay Vitgil's hospital bills. But it was impossible. The pawn shop was across town, and she had the receipt in her purse upstairs. The room fell silent as the pendant swayed, catching the light like tears. Found this in the guest suite, Isabella continued, satisfaction dripping from her voice, along with these. She opened her other hand to reveal the missing river sapphires. Seona felt the world collapse around her. The pendant was impossible. A replica, it had to be. But the sapphires. She looked at Vitgil, seeing the conflict in his eyes as he stared at the evidence of her supposed betrayal. I didn't, she whispered. But the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. How could she explain the pendant without revealing everything? The hospital lies, her true identity, all of it. Margot's voice cut through the tension like a blade. I think perhaps it's time for our guest to leave, unless ... She turned to Vitgil. Unless you'd prefer to call the police? The choice hung in the air. Seona's freedom or her prosecution. She looked at Vitgil, willing him to see the truth in her eyes, to remember everything they'd shared. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, watered by years of family loyalty and carefully orchestrated suspicion. She watched as the wall came down behind his eyes, as the man who had kissed her breathless retreated behind the mask of the river air. I'll handle this, he said, his voice colder than she'd ever heard it. Seona, come with me. Rising on shaky legs, Seona followed him from the dining room. The silk dress that had made her feel like a princess now felt like a costume, a reminder of her presumption in thinking she could belong in this world. They climbed the stairs in silence, the space between them growing with each step. In her suite, Seona turned to him, ready to explain everything. But the look in his eyes stopped the words in her throat. Pack your things, he said quietly. A car will take you wherever you need to go. Vitgil, please, she whispered. Let me explain. Explain what? His voice was tight with controlled emotion. How you gained my trust. How you played on my gratitude. Was any of it real? Tears spilled down her cheeks as she reached for him. All of it. Everything I feel for you is real. He stepped back, and the distance between them became an ocean. I trusted you, he said softly. I defended you to my family, and all the time. I didn't take the sapphires, she insisted, and that pendant, it's impossible. I sold mine to pay your hospital bills. More lies, he laughed, but the sound held no humor. When does it end, Seona? Or is that even your real name? The truth hovered on her lips, about her stepmother, about her desperate choice, about everything. But looking at him now, seeing the hurt and betrayal in his eyes, she knew it was too late. The web of lies, however well-intentioned, had snared them both. "I'll go," she whispered, "but know this. I never betrayed you. Everything I did out of love." The word hung between them like a prayer or a curse. Vitgil's face hardened, but she saw the flicker of pain in his eyes before he turned away. "The car will be ready in 20 minutes, he said to the door. "Goodbye, Siona." He left her there, surrounded by the remnants of a dream that had shattered like crystal on marble. Siona sank to her knees, the silk dress pooling around her like spilled ink, and let the tears fall freely. Outside, the moon continued its journey across the sky, indifferent to the hearts breaking beneath its silver light. In the river mansion, shadows lengthened and schemes bore their bitter fruit, while a love that might have changed everything crumbled under the weight of lies and half-truths. Siona rose finally, stripping off the beautiful dress-like armor she no longer deserved. In the bathroom, she washed away her tears and the last traces of makeup. The woman who stared back from the mirror was neither the polished society beauty of dinner nor the bedraggled angel from the rain. She was simply herself. Siona Remley, a woman who had risked everything for love and lost it all to lies. Chapter 6. The Accusation. The word echoed through the marble halls of the river mansion like a gunshot. "Thief!" Margot's voice carried the weight of generations of river wealth and privilege behind it. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, the stolen pendant dangling from her manicured fingers like a hanged man's noose. The morning light streaming through the stained glass windows cast rainbow shadows across her face, making her look otherworldly. An avenging angel in Chanel. Siona felt the accusation like a physical blow. Around her, the assembled river family watched with expressions ranging from shock to smugness. Only Vitgil's face remained unreadable, his storm-grey eyes fixed on the pendant that had started it all. "I knew she was after the family fortune," Margot continued, descending the stairs with deliberate grace. Each click of her heels against marble felt like a nail in Siona's coffin. "A gold digger with expensive taste, playing on our nephew's gratitude." Siona's voice seemed trapped in her throat. How could she explain that the pendant, her mother's pendant, was supposed to be in a pawn shop across town, that she'd sacrificed her last connection to her mother to save Vitgil's life? "The evidence is quite clear," Margot was saying, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "The pendant was found hidden in her room, along with several pieces from the family collection. Really, dear, did you think we wouldn't notice?" Vitgil stepped forward, his movement drawing all eyes. In the week since leaving the hospital, he'd regained his commanding presence. The tailored suit he wore emphasized his powerful frame, and his face held the authority of a man used to controlling empires. "Let me see it," he said quietly, extending his hand for the pendant. Margot passed it to him with a triumphant smile. Vitgil examined it carefully, his fingers tracing the intricate metalwork. Siona watched, her heart pounding, as he turned it over and found the inscription she knew was there. "To my beloved Amara, forever in my heart." His eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw confusion replace the anger. He knew she'd pawned her pendant to pay his hospital bills. She'd admitted as much during one of their late-night conversations, so how could it be here? "Siona," his voice was soft, but carried across the hushed foyer. "Explain." She opened her mouth, but no words came. How could she explain without revealing everything? The lies at the hospital, her true identity, the ultimatum that had driven her from her home that rainy night. "I think it's quite clear," Margot interjected smoothly. "Our guest has been playing us all for fools. The devoted nurse, the selfless angel, all an act to get close to the river fortune." "No!" The denial burst from Siona's lips with explosive force. "That's not true. I would never—" "Then explain the jewels found in your room," Isabella called from the crowd. "Explain how your mother's pendant, which you claim to have sold, is here in our home." Tears burned in Siona's eyes as she looked at Vitchell. "I didn't take anything," she whispered. "You have to believe me." But doubt had crept into his expression, shadows darkening the grey of his eyes. The wall she'd seen glimpses of, the one built by years of family manipulation and betrayal, was sliding into place. "Search her room," Margot commanded, and 2 security guards moved forward. "Wait!" Vitkel's voice cracked like a whip. "I'll do it." He turned to Siona, and the look in his eyes nearly brought her to her knees. "Show me," he said quietly. They climbed the stairs together, but the space between them felt like miles. In her suite, the beautiful space that had briefly felt like home, Siona watched helplessly as Vitkel moved methodically through her belongings. The sapphires were found in the false bottom of an antique jewelry box, a hiding place so obvious it was almost insulting. Vitkel held them up to the light, the stones catching fire in the morning sun. "Did you think I wouldn't protect you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Did you think you needed to steal from my family when I would have given you anything you asked for?" "Vitkel, please." Siona stepped toward him, her hands outstretched. "This is a setup. I would never betray you like this." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker of the connection they'd shared, the deep, inexplicable bond that had drawn them together in the rain. But then his gaze fell on the pendant again, and the wall slammed back into place. "You claim to have sold this to pay my hospital bills," he said flatly. "Was that a lie too?" "No!" Siona reached for her purse, pulling out the pawnshop receipt with trembling fingers. "Look, I have proof. This pendant should be across town right now. That one must be a fake, a copy." "Enough!" The word fell between them like a blade. "Enough lies, Siona. I trusted you. I defended you to my family. He broke off, running a hand through his hair in a rare display of agitation. "I was falling in love with you." The past tense shattered something in Siona's chest. She swayed on her feet, grateful for the nearby wall that supported her. "Vitchell," she whispered, "everything I feel for you is real. Everything I did because I don't." He held up a hand, stopping the words she desperately needed to say. "Just don't." Heavy footsteps in the hallway announced the arrival of the security team. Margot swept in behind them, triumph written across her aristocratic features. "Well?" she asked, though the answer was clear in the way Vitkel held the sapphires. "Take her to my study," he said, not looking at Siona. "I'll handle this." The security guards moved forward, but Siona barely felt their hands on her arms. All she could see was Vitkel's face, the mask of the river air firmly in place, no trace remaining of the man who had kissed her breathless just hours ago. They led her through the mansion's opulent halls, past whispers and stairs, to Vitkel's private study. The room should have felt familiar. She'd spent hours here with him, talking late into the night as he recovered. Now it felt like a prison, with its dark wood paneling and heavy curtains. The guards left her there, closing the door with a quiet click that seemed to seal her fate. Siona sank into one of the leather chairs, her legs no longer able to support her. Around her, evidence of Vitchell's life mocked her. Photos of him with his family, awards from his business empire, the casual displays of wealth that had never mattered to her but now seemed to condemn her. Time stretched like taffy, minutes bleeding into hours. Outside the study windows, the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting patterns on the Persian carpet. Siona's mind raced, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The pendant was impossible. She'd pawned it herself, had the receipt to prove it. The sapphires in the jewelry box were an obvious plant, but who would go to such lengths to destroy her? And why? The answer whispered at the edges of her consciousness, but before she could grasp it, the study door opened. Vitgil entered alone, his face set in lines of granite. He crossed to his desk without looking at her, the sapphires and pendant clicking against the polished wood as he set them down. "You have a choice," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Leave now, quietly, and we won't press charges. Stay and face the consequences of your actions." Siona rose on shaky legs. "Vitgil, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes took her breath away. "How you manipulated your way into my life. How you played on my gratitude, my attraction to you. Was any of it real, Siona?" "All of it," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Everything I feel for you is real. I never took those jewels. The pendant, it's impossible. I sold mine to pay your bills because I couldn't bear to see you suffer, because I—" "Don't say it." His voice cracked slightly. "Don't make this harder than it already is." He moved to the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. "A car is waiting to take you wherever you want to go. Your things will be sent to whatever address you provide." "So that's it?" Siona's voice rose with desperation. "After everything we've shared, everything we've been through, you're just going to believe the worst of me?" Vitgil's hands clenched at his sides. "The evidence! Damn the evidence!" She crossed to him, forcing him to look at her. "Look in my eyes, Vitgil. Look at me and tell me you believe I would betray you like this." For a moment something flickered in his gaze, doubt perhaps, or the remnants of what they'd shared. But then his expression hardened again. "Goodbye, Siona." He turned away, each word falling like ice between them. I wish things had been different." The dismissal was final. Siona stood there for a moment longer, memorizing him. The proud line of his jaw, the breadth of his shoulders, the way the morning light caught the silver at his temples. Then she straightened her spine, gathering the tattered remains of her dignity around her like armor. "One day," she said quietly, "you'll learn the truth. I pray it doesn't come too late." She left the study with her head high, though her heart was shattering with each step. The assembled River family watched her descent down the grand staircase, their whispers following her like poisoned arrows. At the front door, Margot waited with a satisfied smile. "Such a shame," she said, voice dripping with false sympathy. "But really, dear, what did you expect? A river only marries their own kind." Siona met her gaze steadily. "You've won nothing," she said softly, "because unlike you, I truly love him." The words hung in the air as she walked out into the morning sunshine. The waiting car gleamed black and impersonal, its driver carefully expressionless as he held the door for her. As the river estate disappeared behind her, Siona finally let the tears fall. She'd lost everything. Again. But this time, the loss carried the weight of a heart given freely and a love that might have changed everything. Somewhere above, she knew Vitgil was watching her departure from his study window. She didn't look back. Couldn't bear to see if he was already turning away, already forgetting the connection that had sparked between them in the rain. The car carried her away from dreams of love and belonging toward an uncertain future. But deep in her heart, Siona knew this wasn't the end of their story. Because some bonds transcend lies and betrayal, some truths demand to be heard, and some loves are worth fighting for, even when all hope seems lost. Chapter 7. Prayers in the dark rain lashed against the windows of Siona's hotel room, echoing the storm in her heart. The modest suite at the Marriott was a far cry from the luxury of the River estate, but it was all she could afford with what remained of her emergency funds. Wrapped in a thin hotel robe, she knelt beside the bed, her mother's rosary, the only piece of her past she'd kept. wrapped around her trembling fingers. "Mama," she whispered into the gathering darkness, "I tried to make you proud, but I've lost everything. Again." Tears fell silently onto her clasped hands as memories flooded back. Her mother's smile, the weight of the pendant against her throat, the warmth in Vitul's eyes before everything shattered. Outside, thunder cracked across the Manhattan skyline, nature's percussion accompanying her grief. "I never meant to lie," she continued, her voice breaking. "That first night, in the hospital, I was so scared they wouldn't let me stay with him. One lie led to another, and before I knew it—" She pressed her forehead against the cool bedspread, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Unknown to Siona, Vitkul stood outside her door, his hand raised to knock but frozen in place. He'd tracked her here, driven by doubts he couldn't silence and questions that haunted his dreams. Through the thin hotel wall, her broken whispers reached him, each word a dagger to his heart. "I loved him, Mama. Love him still. Is that my punishment? To find love only to lose it to lies and schemes I never understood?" Inside the room, Siona rose on unsteady legs, moving to the window. The city lights blurred through her tears, creating halos that reminded her of the night she'd found Vitkul in the rain. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, remembering the feel of his skin under her fingers as she checked for injuries. "They set me up," she whispered. "The pendant, the sapphires, someone went to extraordinary lengths to destroy what Vitkul and I had. But why? What threat could I possibly pose to the mighty rivers?" In the hallway, Vitkul's breath caught. The pain in her voice matched the doubts that had been eating at him since she'd left. The pendant's appearance had been too convenient, the jewels too obviously planted. His security team had found no evidence of forced entry to the safe, no signs that Siona had ever approached it. "I should have told him everything," Siona continued, unaware of her audience. "About Victoria, about the ultimatum, about why I was really on that street that night. But I was so afraid of losing him, afraid of facing my past, afraid of admitting that the woman he thought was an angel was just a broken girl running from her demons." She moved away from the window, the silk of her robe whispering against her skin. The sound reminded her of that last night at the mansion, of Vitkul's hands on her waist, his lips on hers. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I miss him, Mama. Miss him like I miss you. Like a piece of my soul has been torn away. Is this how you felt about Papa? This ache that never ends, this emptiness that nothing can fill?" Outside the door, Vitkul's hand finally fell to his side. Every instinct urged him to burst in, to gather her in his arms and demand the truth. But the weight of generations of river pride and power held him back. What if this was another performance? What if every tear, every broken word was just another act in her elaborate deception? Inside, Siona sank onto the bed, her fingers finding the business card she'd hidden in her purse. Victoria Thorne Remley's elegant script mocked her. "Sign the papers, and all this goes away. Refuse, and I'll destroy everything you hold dear." "She won't win," Siona whispered fiercely. "I won't let her destroy Mama's legacy, and somehow, someday, I'll prove to Vitkul that what we shared was real." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her head snap up. By the time she reached the door, the corridor was empty, but something in the air, a lingering trace of his cologne perhaps, or just her wishful thinking, made her heart race. "Vitkul?" she called softly, but only silence answered. In the elevator descending to the lobby, Vitkul closed his eyes against the memory of her voice calling his name. His phone buzzed, Margot, probably wondering why he'd missed the board meeting. His aunt had been suspiciously solicitous since Siona's departure, organizing family dinners and introducing him to carefully selected socialites. But none of them made his heart race like Siona's tears. None of them haunted his dreams like her smile, her touch, her unwavering faith in him during those long hospital days. Back in her room, Siona returned to her prayers. "Give me strength, Mama, to face whatever comes next, to fight for the truth, to believe that love, real, soul-deep love, can survive any storm." The rain continued to fall, washing away tears but not memories. In her mind, Siona replayed every moment with Vitgil, every touch, every kiss, every shared laugh and tender glance. She might have lost him to lies and schemes, but these memories were hers to keep. Rising from her knees, she moved to the small desk where her laptop glowed in the darkness. Victoria's ultimatum still waited for a response, but Siona had made her choice. She would fight for her mother's legacy, for the truth, and for the love she'd found and lost in the rain. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she began to write, pouring out the whole story, every truth, every lie, every moment that had led her to this place. When she finished, she would send it to Vitgil. Let him judge her then, with all the facts laid bare. In his penthouse across the city, Vitgil stood at his own window, watching the same storm paint Manhattan in sheets of silver. In his hand, he held Siona's pendant, the real one, retrieved from the pawn shop that afternoon. The inscription caught the light. "To my beloved Amara, forever in my heart." Two identical pendants, two versions of the truth, and somewhere in between, a love worth fighting for. If only they could find their way back to each other through the shadows of doubt and deception. The night deepened around them both, each lost in thoughts of the other, each wrestling with truths and lies and the fine line between them. Outside, the storm raged on, but somewhere beyond the clouds, stars still shone, like hope, like love, like the promise of dawn after the darkest night. Siona's prayers echoed in the empty room, carried on the wind to whatever power might be listening. Let him see the truth. Let our love be stronger than their lies. Let this not be the end of our story. And somewhere in the night, perhaps those prayers were heard. For even as doubt and distance separated them, fate was weaving new threads in their tapestry. Threads that would lead them back to each other, back to the truth, back to a love that had begun in the rain and refused to die in the shadows. Chapter 8. Truth and Consequences. The autumn rain fell in silver sheets over Manhattan, turning the city into a watercolor of blurred lights and shadows. In his penthouse office at River Enterprises, Vitgil stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching lightning dance between skyscrapers. The real pendant, Siona's pendant, weighed heavily in his pocket, a constant reminder of the mysteries surrounding the woman who had saved his life. His laptop chimed with an incoming email. Another society event invitation, probably. Margot had been relentless in her attempts to introduce him to suitable women since Siona's departure. But the sender's name made his heart stop. Siona Remley. With fingers that trembled slightly, he opened the message. The subject line was simple. The truth. "Dearest Vitgil," it began, and he could almost hear her voice, soft and musical, forming the words. "By the time you read this, I will have either lost you forever or given us a chance at something real. No more lies, no more half-truths. You deserve to know everything. My name is Siona Remley. I am the daughter of Dr. Amara Remley, the renowned pediatric surgeon who died in a plane crash 3 years ago. What the world doesn't know is that she left behind not only groundbreaking medical research, but also a foundation worth millions. A foundation my stepmother, Victoria Thorne Remley, has been trying to steal since the day of the funeral. The night I found you in the rain, I had just walked away from everything. Victoria had given me an ultimatum: sign over my inheritance or watch her destroy my mother's legacy with false accusations of medical malpractice and embezzlement. I chose my mother's reputation over my own security. I didn't know who you were when I pulled you from that car. I only knew you needed help. The lie about being your wife, it spilled out because I was afraid they wouldn't let me stay with you otherwise. One lie led to another, and suddenly I was trapped in a web of my own making. But everything else was real. Every moment we shared, every word spoken, every touch and smile and whispered promise, all of it came from my heart. I fell in love with you, Vitgil River, not your name or your fortune or your power. I fell in love with the man who held my hand through fever dreams, who looked at me like I was something precious, who made me believe in second chances. The pendant you found in my room, a replica planted by someone who knew its significance. The original is still at Crown Pawnbrokers on 47th Street, ticket number 247913. The sapphires were placed in my room while I was at dinner. Check the security footage. I never went near the safe. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't even expect you to believe me. But you deserve to know the truth, all of it. Whatever happens next, know that my love for you was never a lie. Forever yours, Seona. Vitgil read the email 3 times, each word burning itself into his memory. His private investigator's report sat on his desk, confirming everything. Dr. Amara Remley's death, the foundation, Victoria Thorne Remley's suspicious financial movements. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, already knowing who it would be. Margot swept into the office, elegant as always in Dior. "Darling, you missed the board meeting. Again." Her eyes narrowed as she took in his expression. "What's wrong?" Instead of answering, Vitgil pulled out both pendants, the planted one and the one he'd retrieved from the pawn shop. "Interesting, isn't it? 2 identical pieces. One used to frame an innocent woman." Margot's face remained carefully blank, but something flickered in her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Vitgil's voice was soft, but carried an edge of steel. The security footage from that night makes for fascinating viewing, especially the part where Isabella enters Seona's room carrying a small package, 10 minutes before the discovery of the stolen jewels. Color drained from Margot's face. "Vitgil, did you really think I wouldn't investigate?" He turned to face her fully, his height and presence filling the room. "Did you think I would just accept that the woman who saved my life, who stayed by my side for 7 days, was nothing but a thief? We were protecting you." Margot's composure cracked. "She was nobody, a gold digger who... She is Dr. Amara Remley's daughter." The words fell like bombs in the quiet office. "A woman whose family fortune rivals our own. She walked away from everything to protect her mother's legacy and then gave up her last connection to that legacy to save my life." Realization dawned in Margot's eyes. The hospital bills. She sold her mother's pendant, the real one, to pay for my care. While you were all suspicious of her motives, she was sacrificing everything for me. Thunder cracked outside, making Margot jump. Vitgil continued, his voice growing colder with each word. "You arranged all of this, didn't you? The replica pendant, the planted jewels, the discovery that would drive her away, because you couldn't stand the idea of someone threatening your control over the river fortune. Everything I did was for this family." Margot's voice rose with desperation. "The Rivers have always married within their circle. Your parents, my parents, would be ashamed of what you've done." Vitgil's words cut like ice. "Get out! Vitgil, please, get out!" Each word carried the weight of years of accumulated power. "The board will receive my full report on your activities tomorrow morning. Pack your office. Your resignation will be announced by noon." Margot stood frozen for a moment, then gathered her dignity around her like a shield. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. No, Vitgil replied, turning back to the rain-swept windows. My mistake was not trusting my heart when it told me Siona was innocent. That's a mistake I intend to correct. The door closed behind Margot with a soft click, leaving Vitgil alone with the storm and his thoughts. He pulled out his phone, fingers hovering over Siona's number. But a text wasn't enough. This needed to be done in person. The drive to her hotel seemed to take forever, even with his best driver navigating the rain-slicked streets. In his pocket, the real pendant pressed against his heart, like a promise waiting to be kept. The hotel lobby was quiet at this late hour. The night clerk recognized him. Money and power opened all doors in Manhattan and gave him Siona's room number without question. Standing before her door, Vitgil took a deep breath. He could hear movement inside, soft footsteps, the rustle of fabric. His heart pounded with an intensity that surprised him. He'd faced hostile takeovers and billion-dollar negotiations with less nervousness than he felt now. His knock echoed in the quiet hallway. There was a pause, then the sound of the security chain being removed. The door opened, and there she was. Siona stood in the doorway, wrapped in a simple white robe, her dark curls tumbling over her shoulders. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, and he watched emotions play across her face. Surprise, hope, fear, and something deeper that made his breath catch. Vitgil. His name on her lips was both question and prayer. I got your email, he said softly, and I came to return something that belongs to you. He held out the pendant, the real one, with its scratches and memories. Siona's hand flew to her throat, tears filling her eyes. How did you— I should have trusted you, he interrupted, stepping closer. Should have known that the woman who saved my life, who gave up everything to stay by my side, could never have betrayed me. A tear slipped down Siona's cheek. I'm so sorry, she whispered. The lies— we're told out of love. He reached out, brushing the tear away with his thumb, just as everything you did was done out of love. She leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. I was so afraid, she admitted. Afraid of losing you, afraid of my past catching up with me, afraid of— His lips captured hers, silencing her fears with a kiss that spoke of forgiveness and passion and promises. She melted against him, her hands fisting in his jacket as though afraid he might disappear. The pendant pressed between them, no longer a symbol of betrayal, but a testament to sacrifice and love. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Vitgil rested his forehead against hers. No more fear, he murmured. No more lies, just us, together, facing whatever comes next. Together? Siona's voice held a tremor of hope. Together, he confirmed. I love you, Siona Remley. The real you, with all your complications and courage and incredible capacity for love. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were tears of joy. I love you too, she whispered. I never stopped. He lifted the pendant, and she turned, allowing him to fasten it around her throat. The familiar weight settled against her skin as his lips found the sensitive spot behind her ear. Come home, he murmured. Not to the mansion. I've moved out until Margot's influence is fully removed, but to my penthouse, to our future. Siona turned in his arms, her eyes shining with love and trust restored. Home isn't a place, she said softly. It's wherever we're together. Their lips met again, and this kiss held all the promise of new beginnings. Outside, the storm began to clear, stars peeking through breaks in the clouds, like their love, stronger for having weathered the tempest, brighter for having overcome the darkness. In that hotel room, surrounded by the remnants of betrayal and the dawn of truth, Vitgil River and Siona Remley found their way back to each other. Not as CEO and savior, not as heir and angel, but as two people who had discovered that real love, soul-deep, truth-bearing, storm-weathering love, was worth fighting for. And somewhere, perhaps, Dr. Amara Remley smiled down on her daughter, knowing that the pendant she'd left behind had helped guide two hearts to where they truly belonged, together. Chapter 9. The storm breaks. Thunder rolled across Manhattan as Vitgil stood in his office at River Enterprises, the evidence spread before him like weapons of war. Security footage showing Isabella entering Siona's room with a small package. Bank records proving Margot's connection to the pawnshop that had mysteriously lost the receipt for Siona's pendant. Email exchanges revealing a carefully orchestrated plan to separate him from the woman he loved. His phone buzzed. Margot, demanding his presence at the mansion for an urgent family matter. His lips curved in a bitter smile. Today would end the lies, one way or another. The River Mansion loomed against storm clouds, its modern architecture stark against the darkening sky. Inside, the family had gathered in the great hall, their faces reflecting various degrees of concern and curiosity. Margot stood at the center, resplendent in Chanel, playing the role of concerned aunt to perfection. "Darling," she began as Vitgil entered, "we need to discuss—" "Yes," he cut her off, his voice carrying the authority of generations of river power. "We do." The hall fell silent as he strode to the center of the room. Rain lashed against the windows, providing a dramatic backdrop to what was about to unfold. "For generations," he began, his voice carrying to every corner, "the rivers have prided themselves on power, on control, on maintaining what we call family traditions. We've married for advantage, not love. We've chosen wealth over worth. We've sacrificed happiness for the appearance of perfection." Murmurs rippled through the assembled family. Margot's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "I was willing to play by those rules," Vitgil continued, "until someone showed me what real loyalty looks like, what true love means." "If you're speaking of that girl," Margot began, but Vitgil held up a hand, silencing her. "That girl saved my life," he said, his voice taking on an edge of steel. "Not just by pulling me from that wreck, but by showing me what it means to sacrifice everything for someone you love." He pulled out his phone, connecting it to the mansion's sophisticated audiovisual system. Security footage appeared on the massive screen behind him. "Watch carefully," he commanded. The footage showed Isabella sneaking into Siona's room, carefully placing something in the antique jewelry box. This was taken the night before the discovery of the stolen sapphires. Color drained from Isabella's face as heads turned toward her. But Vitgil wasn't finished. He changed the display to show bank records. "Interesting transactions, Aunt Margot. Particularly this payment to Crown Pawnbrokers, the same shop where Siona sold her mother's pendant to pay my hospital bills. The same shop that mysteriously lost her receipt when she tried to prove her innocence." Margot's composure cracked slightly. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Vitgil's voice cut through the hall like a blade. "You couldn't stand the idea of an outsider threatening your control over the river fortune. So you orchestrated this entire scheme, the planted jewels, the fake pendant, the discovery that would drive her away." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the shocked faces of the family. Some looked ashamed, others calculating. A few seemed impressed by the elaborate plot. "What I don't understand," Vitgil continued, his voice dropping dangerously, "is how you could be so blind. Siona Remley is Dr. Amara Remley's daughter. Her family fortune rivals our own. She walked away from everything to protect her mother's legacy, then gave up her last connection to that legacy to save my life." The revelation sent shockwaves through the hall. Dr. Amara Remley's name carried weight even in river circles. Her humanitarian work and medical breakthroughs had made her legendary. "You destroyed an innocent woman's reputation." Vitgil's voice rose with controlled anger. You manipulated evidence, bought false witnesses, all to maintain your grip on power. Margot finally found her voice. Everything I did was for this family. The rivers have always been wrong. The words fell like thunder in the silence. We've confused power with strength, control with love, manipulation with loyalty. But that ends today. He turned to address the entire family. I love Seona Remley, not for her name or her fortune, but for her heart, for her courage in the face of your cruelty, for her unwavering faith in me even when I doubted her. Rain pounded against the windows as he continued. Today, you have a choice. Accept us, accept change, accept love over tradition, or leave. Take your share of the fortune and go. But understand this, I choose her. Over all of this, over every tradition and expectation, I choose love. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from the back of the hall, a quiet voice spoke up. About damn time. All heads turned to see Great-Aunt Eleanor making her way forward, her cane tapping against marble floors. Though well into her 80s, she carried herself with regal grace. I watched my own love story die on the altar of river tradition, she said, her voice carrying clearly. Watched as this family chose power over happiness, generation after generation. She reached Vigil, placing a weathered hand on his arm. Choose love, my boy. Choose happiness. The rest is just window dressing. Her words seemed to break a spell. One by one, family members began to step forward, some offering support, others simply nodding acceptance. A few, led by Margot, turned and left without a word. But it was Isabella who provided the final surprise. She stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I was jealous of your love, of what you have. Margot convinced me it was for the best, but... She pulled something from her bag, the original pendant receipt from the pawn shop. I kept this, just in case. I couldn't quite bring myself to destroy it. Vigil took the receipt, his hands steady despite the emotions roiling inside him. Thank you, he said quietly. Not for this, but for finally choosing truth over manipulation. Thunder rolled again, but the storm was beginning to clear. Through the windows, rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the hall in shafts of gold. Vigil pulled out his phone again, this time dialing a number he knew by heart. When Seona answered, his voice was thick with emotion. Come home, he said simply. It's time. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Family members who had chosen to stay helped prepare for Seona's return. Fresh flowers appeared in every room, while the staff, many of whom had secretly supported the couple, rushed to make everything perfect. When the front doors opened, revealing Seona in a simple cream dress, her mother's pendant restored to its rightful place at her throat, the remaining rivers welcomed her with genuine warmth. But Seona had eyes only for Vigil. Their gazes met across the hall, and in that moment, everything else faded away. He crossed to her in long strides, taking her hands in his. I should have believed in us sooner, he said softly. Should have fought for you from the beginning. You're fighting for us now, she replied, her eyes shining with unshed tears. That's all that matters. When he kissed her, there in front of his remaining family, it felt like coming home. Like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place, like the beginning of something extraordinary. Because some loves are worth fighting for, some truths demand to be heard, and sometimes in choosing love over tradition, we find not just happiness, but redemption. The storm had broken, leaving behind a world washed clean. In the river mansion, where power had ruled for generations, love had finally won. And in that victory was the promise of not just change, but transformation, for a family, for a legacy, and for two hearts that had found their way home through darkness to light. Chapter 10. Return to Grace Morning. Light painted the penthouse in shades of gold, casting gentle shadows across rumpled silk sheets. Siona woke slowly, aware of Vigil's solid warmth behind her, his arm draped possessively across her waist. The events of yesterday felt like a dream, his public declaration, the family's acceptance, the triumph of love over tradition. His lips brushed her bare shoulder, letting her know he was awake. "Good morning, Angel," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. She turned in his arms, drinking in the sight of him, tousled dark hair, storm-grey eyes heavy-lidded with desire, the sheets draped low across his hips. "Good morning," she whispered back, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. The doorbell's chime shattered their peaceful moment. Vigil groaned, pressing a quick kiss to her lips before rising. She admired the play of muscles across his back as he pulled on a robe, then wrapped herself in silk to follow. In the living room they found an unexpected sight. Isabella stood there, clutching a massive bouquet of peonies, Siona's favorite flowers. Her usual polished appearance was slightly disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed from what appeared to be a sleepless night. "I'm sorry," she blurted before either of them could speak. "What I did, helping Margot plant the evidence, trying to destroy your happiness, it was unforgivable." Siona felt Vigil tense beside her, but she stepped forward, drawn by the genuine remorse in Isabella's voice. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why did you do it?" Isabella's perfectly manicured hands trembled around the flower stems. "Fear," she admitted. "Fear of change, of losing our way of life. Margot convinced us you were a threat to everything the rivers stand for, but watching you yesterday, seeing the way you look at each other," tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was wrong. We were all wrong." The flowers were a peace offering, but they represented something more. The beginning of healing, of family bonds rebuilt on truth instead of manipulation. Siona accepted the bouquet, their sweet fragrance filling the air. "Thank you," she said simply. Isabella wasn't the last visitor that morning. One by one, family members arrived, some bearing gifts, others simply offering words of apology and acceptance. Each one carried stories of their own loves, lost to tradition, their own regrets, buried under years of river pride. By midday, the penthouse was filled with flowers and family. Great-Aunt Eleanor held court in the living room, sharing tales of the river's past that had never been spoken aloud. Cousins who had once watched Siona with suspicion now sought her opinion on everything from investments to interior design. Vigil watched it all with quiet satisfaction, never straying far from Siona's side. His hand would find hers in quiet moments, their fingers intertwining with familiar perfection. The way he looked at her, like she was something precious, something miraculous, made her heart skip every time. As afternoon shadows lengthened, the family began to depart. Final hugs were exchanged, promises of future gatherings made. Isabella was the last to leave, pausing at the door. "I found something," she said, pulling an envelope from her bag. "In Margot's study after she left." Inside were documents, proof of Victoria Thorne-Remley's attempts to steal the foundation, evidence of her manipulation and threats, everything Siona needed to protect her mother's legacy. "I thought you might need these," Isabella said softly, "to finally be free of the past." Tears blurred Siona's vision as she hugged her former enemy, now family. When the door closed behind Isabella, leaving them alone at last, Vigil pulled Siona into his arms. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. His lips met hers with tender passion, saying everything words couldn't express. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, his eyes had darkened to the color of storm clouds. "Marry me," he said suddenly. Siona's heart stopped. "What?" He pulled away slightly, dropping to one knee in a movement so graceful it seemed choreographed. From his pocket, he produced a ring that took her breath away, not for its size or sparkle, though both were impressive, but for its familiarity. "This was my mother's," he said softly, "the only piece of jewelry she valued above the river sapphires. She told me once to save it for someone extraordinary, someone who would love me for myself, not my name or fortune." Tears spilled down Siona's cheeks as he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved my life that night in the rain, but that was just the beginning. You saved my soul with your unwavering love, your unshakable faith in us. You showed me what real strength looks like, not in power or position, but in the courage to love completely, to sacrifice everything for what matters most." He took her hand, the ring hovering at her fingertip. "Marry me, Siona Remley. Make me the happiest man alive. Let me spend the rest of our lives showing you exactly how much you mean to me." Through her tears, Siona saw their whole future in his eyes. Love and laughter, challenges overcome together, a life built on trust and truth and tenderness. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." The ring slid onto her finger as though it had been made for her. Then Vitgil was standing, pulling her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made the world disappear. She wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer, pouring all her love and joy into the kiss. When they finally broke apart, the sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the warm light, the ring sparkled, not just with diamonds, but with promises kept and love triumphant. "I love you," Vitgil murmured, pressing soft kisses along her jaw. "My angel, my savior, my future wife." Siona's heart soared at the words. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "Forever." As night fell over the city, they stood wrapped in each other's arms, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The pendant at Siona's throat caught the light, a reminder of where their journey had begun. But it was the ring on her finger that spoke of where they were going, toward a future bright with possibility, rich with love, strong enough to weather any storm. Because some loves are worth fighting for, worth sacrificing everything to protect. Some connections transcend logic and tradition, binding hearts together with bonds stronger than family pride or social position. And sometimes, in the midst of life's greatest storms, angels appear. Not with wings and halos, but with hearts brave enough to love completely, souls strong enough to fight for what matters most. For Vitgil and Siona, their story had begun in rain and darkness, in lies and misunderstandings. But it would continue in light and truth, in love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Together, they would build something new, a legacy of love that would reshape the River family for generations to come. As the last light faded from the sky, Vitgil pulled Siona closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of tomorrow. And in that kiss was everything, past and future, trials and triumphs, two hearts beating as one, two souls forever entwined. Chapter 11. Vows and Vindication. The river estate transformed under autumn's golden light, modern architecture softened by thousands of white roses and crystalline dew. In what was once Margot's private sanctuary, now a serene bridal suite, Siona stood before an antique mirror as the first rays of dawn painted the room in amber hues. Her wedding dress wasn't just couture, it was art. Handcrafted French lace, cascaded like morning mist over silk, each pearl and crystal catching light like trapped stars. Around her throat, her mother's pendant rested beside Vitgil's matching piece, symbols of sacrifice and redemption united. "Something's missing," Great-Aunt Eleanor announced, entering with a velvet box. Inside lay the river tiara, platinum and diamonds that had graced river brides for generations. "This belongs to you now," Siona's fingers trembled as Eleanor secured it among her dark curls. "I can't accept—" "You can. You will." Eleanor's eyes met hers in the mirror. "You saved this family, my dear. Not just Vigil that night in the rain, but all of us. You showed us what real love looks like." A knock interrupted them. Isabella entered carrying a bouquet that took Siona's breath away. Peonies and roses in shades of cream and blush, each bloom perfect as dawn. "The gardens sent their best," Isabella said softly. Their eyes met, former enemies now bound by understanding and redemption. "Everything's ready." More family members arrived, each bearing gifts that carried weight beyond their material value. Cousin Blake's wife brought the river sapphires, no longer symbols of deceit, but of new beginnings. Another cousin offered a handkerchief edged with antique lace. It's brought river brides luck for generations. Even Margot had sent something, a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to Vigil's mother, accompanied by a note of blessing and apology. The pearls now graced Siona's ears, completing her transformation. But it was the package from Victoria Thorne Remley that surprised everyone. Inside lay documents, not just releasing all claims to the Remley Foundation, but evidence clearing Dr. Amara's name of any wrongdoing. The note was simple. "Your mother would be proud." Tears threatened to fall, but Eleanor was ready with a handkerchief. "Save them for the ceremony, dear. Though perhaps we should check your makeup one last time." The great hall had become a cathedral of light and flowers. Hundreds of candles flickered in crystal holders, their light multiplied by mirrors and polished marble. The guest list read like a who's who of Manhattan society, but also included humanitarian workers who had known her mother, and the hospital staff who had witnessed their love stories beginning. As the first notes of music filled the air, Siona took a deep breath. In her father's absence, great-uncle Richard, the family patriarch who had supported them from the start, waited to walk her down the aisle. "Ready, my dear." The doors opened, and time seemed to stop. There, at the end of the flower-lined aisle, stood Vigil. His tuxedo was perfection, but it was his expression that brought tears to her eyes. He looked at her like she was sunrise after endless night, like every dream he'd ever had was walking toward him. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and the world disappeared. Each step brought her closer to their future, each breath filled with the promise of tomorrow. When Uncle Richard placed her hand in Vigil's, the connection felt electric. "My angel," Vigil whispered, his voice rough with emotion. They had written their own vows, speaking from hearts too full for borrowed words. "I found you in the rain," Vigil began, his thumb stroking her palm. "Broken but undefeated, strong enough to save a stranger. You stayed when you could have walked away, sacrificed everything to protect me, loved me through darkness and doubt. Today, I vowed to spend our lives proving worthy of that love." Tears slipped down Siona's cheeks as she spoke her vows. "You saw me when I was invisible, believed in me when I'd lost faith, fought for us when the world conspired against us. You are my strength, my shelter, my home. Today, I vow to love you with the same courage and completeness you've shown me, through every storm, every triumph, every moment of our forever." The rings they exchanged were masterpieces of platinum and diamonds, designed to complement the pendants that had brought them together. As Vigil slipped hers onto her finger, his hands trembled slightly. "With this ring, I thee wed," he said, the traditional words carrying the weight of his heart. When she placed his ring, a broader band that matched hers, on his finger, her own hands shook. "With this ring I thee wed," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "By the power vested in me," the officiant's voice rang out, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Vigil's hand cupped her cheek with infinite tenderness. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, hearts beating in perfect synchronization. Then his lips met hers in a kiss that was both gentle and passionate, tender and possessive, the beginning of forever. The hall erupted in applause, but they barely heard it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Vitgil rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he murmured, for her ears alone. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Always." The reception transformed the River Mansion into a celebration of love's triumph over tradition. The same halls that had once echoed with schemes and suspicion now rang with laughter and joy. Family members who had once watched Siona with distrust now embraced her as one of their own. As evening fell, Vitgil led Siona to the rose garden where they'd shared their first kiss. Fairy lights twinkled in the gathering darkness, turning the space into an enchanted realm. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her close. "Beyond words," she replied, tilting her face up to his. His kiss tasted of champagne and promises, of passion barely contained by propriety. When they broke apart, his eyes had darkened to the color of midnight storms. Their departure was celebrated with sparklers and rose petals, with cheers and tears and promises to gather soon. As their car pulled away from the mansion, Siona looked back at the place where their story had nearly ended, and where it had begun again, stronger for the trials overcome. Vitgil's hand found hers, their rings catching the light. "No regrets?" he asked softly. She turned to him, heart overflowing with love. "Only that we can't live this day again and again." His smile was tender as he brought their joined hands to his lips. "We have a lifetime of days ahead of us, Mrs. River, and I intend to make each one more magical than the last." As Manhattan's lights appeared on the horizon, Siona leaned against her husband's shoulder, completely and perfectly happy. The pendant at her throat caught the light, a reminder of where they'd begun. But it was the rings on their fingers that spoke of where they were going, toward a future bright with promise, rich with love, strong enough to weather any storm. The city welcomed them home with a symphony of lights, each glowing window a star in their personal constellation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new chances to prove that love could triumph over any obstacle. But tonight belonged to them, to promises made and kept, to dreams fulfilled and yet to come, to a love story that had begun in rain and darkness but would continue in light and truth. As their car wound through the city streets, Vitgil pulled Siona closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of tomorrow. And in that kiss was everything, past and future, trials and triumphs, two hearts beating as one, two souls forever entwined. Chapter 12. Destiny's Dawn. Manhattan glittered beneath a canopy of stars as the private elevator ascended to the penthouse. Siona stood at the glass wall, still in her wedding dress, watching the city that had brought them together spread out like a blanket of diamonds below. Behind her, she heard Vitgil's quiet footsteps approaching. The reflection in the glass showed him loosening his bow tie, jacket already discarded. His eyes met hers in the window, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "Wife," he said softly, the word carrying all the weight of their journey. She turned to face him, heart racing beneath French lace and silk. "Husband." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, one hand coming up to gently remove the river tiara. Her dark curls fell free around her shoulders as he set the precious heirloom aside. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, thumb brushing her lower lip, in a gesture that had become wonderfully familiar. "Dance with me," he murmured. Without waiting for music, he pulled her into his arms. They swayed together in the starlight, her head resting against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, like his love for her. "Tell me what you're thinking," she whispered. His hand traced patterns on her back through the lace. I'm thinking about fate, he said softly. About how one rainy night changed everything. About how grateful I am that you were brave enough to save a stranger. She lifted her head to look at him. I think my heart knew even then, knew you were worth saving, worth fighting for. His kiss was gentle at first, a tender exploration that quickly deepened into something more passionate. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against hers. I have something for you, he said. He led her to his study, where a leather portfolio waited on his desk. Inside were documents, the deed to a historic brownstone in the city, and plans for a new medical research center to be built in her mother's name. The house is for us, he explained, arms sliding around her waist from behind. Somewhere that's ours alone, without the weight of river history. And the research center. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Your mother's work deserves to continue. Tears blurred her vision as she traced the plans with trembling fingers. The Amara Remley Center for Pediatric Research would carry forward everything her mother had fought for. Vitgil, she whispered, turning in his arms. This is a beginning, he finished. Our beginning. Their lips met again, this kiss deeper, hungrier. His hands found the tiny pearl buttons of her dress while hers worked at his shirt. Each new revelation of skin was marked with kisses, each touch a promise of forever. Later, as moonlight painted silver paths across tangled sheets, Siona traced the scar on his forehead, the mark from the accident that had brought them together. Any regrets? She asked softly. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Only that we wasted time doubting what our hearts knew from the start. She snuggled closer, head resting over his heart. The pendant and rings caught the moonlight, symbols of their journey from strangers to soulmates. Tell me about our future, she murmured. His fingers tangled in her hair as he spoke. We'll divide our time between the brownstone and traveling the world, supporting your mother's foundation. We'll make the river name synonymous with healing instead of power. And someday... His hand drifted to her flat stomach. We'll fill our home with children who have your courage and my determination. Our own family, she whispered, heart full of dreams, built on love instead of obligation. He tilted her face up to his. A new legacy for both our names. Outside, the city hummed with life far below. But in their bed, wrapped in moonlight and each other's arms, time seemed to stand still. They were no longer the broken girl running from her past, or the powerful heir trapped by tradition. They were simply Siona and Vitgil, two hearts that had found their way home through storms to sunshine. Dawn found them still wrapped together, the first rays of sun painting their skin in shades of gold. Vitgil woke to find Siona watching him, her eyes filled with such love it made his chest ache. What are you thinking? He asked, brushing a curl from her face. That some things are worth fighting for, she replied. Worth sacrificing everything to protect. He pulled her closer, understanding all she wasn't saying. They had lost and found each other, had weathered storms of doubt and deception, had emerged stronger for every trial overcome. I love you, he murmured against her hair. More than power, more than tradition, more than anything I thought I needed before you crashed into my life. She lifted her face for his kiss, pouring all her love and gratitude into the contact. When they finally broke apart, the sun had fully risen, painting Manhattan in shades of promise. Rising to face their first day as husband and wife, they stood together at the window. The city stretched before them, filled with possibilities. The pendant at Siona's throat caught the morning light, while their rings gleamed like captured stars. Ready for our next adventure? Vitgil asked, arms sliding around her waist. She leaned back against him, perfectly content. With you? Always. Because some loves are worth fighting for. Some connections transcend logic and tradition, binding hearts together with bonds stronger than family pride or social position. And sometimes, in the midst of life's greatest storms, angels appear, not with wings and halos, but with hearts brave enough to love completely, souls strong enough to fight for what matters most. For Vitgil and Siona River, their story had begun in rain and darkness, in lies and misunderstandings, but it would continue in light and truth, in love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Together, they would build something new, a legacy of love that would reshape their world for generations to come. The sun rose higher over Manhattan, promising another day of possibilities. In their penthouse sanctuary, two hearts beat as one, two souls forever entwined, ready to face whatever adventures awaited. Because they had found something rare and precious, a love strong enough to weather any storm, deep enough to heal any wound, brave enough to forge new paths through old traditions. A love that had begun with a crash in the rain and would continue through all their tomorrows, growing stronger with each dawn, richer with each challenge overcome. Together, they were more than heirs to fortunes or keepers of legacies. They were partners, soulmates, two halves of a whole that had defied society's expectations to find something real and lasting. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the wealth or the power or the family name, but the love they had fought for and won. The future they would build together, the legacy of healing and hope they would leave for generations to come. As morning light bathed them in golden promise, they held each other close, hearts beating in perfect synchronization. Their love story had only just begun, but already it had changed everything, proving that real love, soul-deep and storm-weathering love, was the greatest power of all. I promised you I would tell you our favorite food at the end of the story. I love to eat BBQ ribs, and Binta loves to eat fried chicken. Subscribe if you loved.